Previously in Hedge Knights, the Adlets hurried to construct a pantry for their bunker crop of mushrooms. They defended against a dangerous raiding party, and many people were left injured. The southern section of the main farm was cleared of fungus and readied for Megahoof's new plan. Seeds that Megahoof had recovered from an ancient laboratory were sown into the newly cleared fields. New ovens and a millstone were constructed in preparation for the ancient seeds. Lazarus's workshop was improved with billows, a grindstone, tools, and a quenching bucket. And the community worked to clean around the perimeter of the keep. Episode 10, Curtain Wall. The members of the Bison Glade continue their efforts to build up a perimeter buffer around the keep to protect it from future pollution. The cycles of smog were almost as regular as the visitor raids, and some of the Adlets wondered if the two were connected in some way. The Adlets' history books made it very clear the pollution was caused by the original visitors a few hundred years previous. Many of those visitors were described as hairless, wearing bright fabrics and glowing metals, and wielded weapons of immense power. They were clearly not the monstrous raiders that the squires had to defend against, but the relationship between the modern raiders and the visitors from hundreds of years ago was very unclear. Megahoof awoke frustrated with his lack of progress studying the northern tree. He realized that summer was fast approaching and he would need to research ways to help cool the keep, as the smelters, furnaces, and ovens generated a lot of heat. Tangier noticed that the fat that had been left on the shelf outside would rot if it wasn't processed into tallow. She made a note for Sapo that she was headed off to gather some salt from the southern hills to render the fat into tallow, so he should make some time to process it today. Megahoof apologized to both Sapo and Lazarus that he had made some mistakes laying out the southern fields. He had forgotten to account for a gift he was planning for Tangier. Lazarus smiled and said he'd be happy to make the necessary fixes, while Sapo nodded in silent agreement. One insight Megahoof had gained from the time studying the northern tree was the rate of absorption was slower than he initially thought. He would let the other Adlets know not to bother trying to clean any more of the glade this season until he furthered his inquiry into the trees. Judea wanted to help Tangier and Lazarus prepare for their little one. She planned on building a crib and stool. She knew that Tangier could build it for herself, but thought doing it for her would be a welcomed gift. Upon Tangier's return trip to fetch salt from the southern hills, she noticed a burning streak across the sky. It seemed like an omen or harbinger of doom. She rushed back towards the keep to warn the others. The ground shook, and her eyes focused eastward towards the marshes. Through the turbulent water and steam, she could see it wasn't an enemy attack, but a giant golden boulder. She took this as a blessing and would tell the others about their good fortune. Sapo thanked Tangier for the salt and told her that he'd process the fat renderings immediately. A dry thunderstorm rolled through the hills of the glade. The charged atmosphere had a way of mixing with the pollution to make the air smell much more clean than it truly was. Despite the risk of fire and lightning strikes, the Adlets had come to appreciate the storms. A similar phenomenon happened back on the coast. Large storms would roll in from deep ocean and were often quite destructive. but it brought fresh ocean air, and usually fishing yields would improve over the next week or two as well. Storms were a mixed blessing to the Adlets. Lazarus noticed a lot of clothing people were wearing looked quite ragged. He himself was in battered armor, but the community didn't have enough iron for him to forge a new suit of armor, or at least not yet. Lazarus also noticed the amount of wool and linen the community had gathered started to fill the shelves, and he thought it might be nice to put some of his tailoring skills to practice. The coastal Adlets were mostly refugees from the Gatraro kingdom, one of the 11 kingdoms before the invaders arrived. Gatraro's order of knights were required to practice armorsmithing and tailoring to maintain their equipment. This practice was largely lost in modern times, but Lazarus wore his armor year-round and needed the skills for maintenance. In talking with Dave about some of the traditions the coastal Adlets respected, Judea had realized the squires hadn't put the bones of the ancient soldiers from the battlefield to rest. She knew that they had abundance of limestone and decided to construct a memorial on the grounds of the old battlefield as a way to respect the fallen soldiers. Dave offered to help, and Tangier could be seen heading to the stockpile of limestone, even without being prompted. The masons hauled armloads of limestone well into the night, enjoying the unusually clean air and sky. Starry nights were a rarity. Most nights, all the night sky would have to offer would be dispersed moonlight struggling to pierce the thick brown smog that enveloped everything. The Adlets decided to prepare for the dog days of summer. The smelters, furnaces, and ovens generated enough heat that the hearths could be broken down and stored for next winter. Megahoof assured everyone he'd have swamp coolers set up soon. Megahoof continued to research the secrets of alchemy, as it was essential knowledge in order to further improve Tangier's life, which was about to get a lot more stressful with a youngster on the way. The absence of glowing hearth fires brought about a darkness in the slate-colored keep. Arelco politely requested that the builders construct some additional lamps, as he had knocked into furniture on more than one occasion. Dave applauded Judea's efforts to respect the long-dead soldiers who had given their lives in this glade ages ago. The work was difficult in the low light of the crescent moon. Soon, Sapo joined them to help fell the trees in the area upon the request of Judea. Sapo's axe was so perfectly suited to splitting the withering gray trees that in just 2 short hours the entire area had been clear-cut. Tangier honored Arauco's request for more lighting. Working in a dim keep was a strain on everyone's eyes. Now that the monument to the falling soldiers was taking form, the plan was to intern the bones within the walls of the monument in hopes the spirits of the soldiers would look over the newly inhabited glade. Lazarus planned to tailor more clothes and needed additional shelves to be constructed to keep the new clothes from becoming dingy or damaged upon the keep floor. The bones of the forgotten soldiers were ready to be enshrined. Tugia planned on constructing a viewing window into the monument and building a roofed terrace to protect the monument from acidic rains and snow. While constructing the shrine, Judea contemplated ways to make sure her and her fellow adlets did not share the same fate as these forgotten soldiers. The last siege on their keep was a bloody one, and her husband and friends nearly lost their lives. She knew there were better ways to defend the glade, but improving the defenses would be costly in both labor and materials. Now that the monument was completed, Megahoof decided it was time to share what few insights he had made studying the northern tree. He had carefully logged the rate at which the northern tree absorbed pollution from the soil, and used some rough observations that Sappho and Lazarus had made the previous season when they were sowing rice around the southern trees. Comparing both datasets, he came to the conclusion that the northern tree had been damaged by the adlets in some way, but he wasn't sure how. Megahoof speculated that maybe it was the nutrients the fungus had absorbed from the soil over the winter, or maybe the weight of the walls, or the restricted sunlight from the roof, or even the tilling of the soils which altered how rainwater would flow. He proposed the entire community should come together and restore the area to its natural state, removing the roof, bricks, mortar, and farm plots in hopes the tree would be restored. Megahoof planned on asking Lazarus and Sappho to help him study the tree, but first wanted to observe and chart whether or not returning the area around the tree to its natural state helped to restore the tree's ability to absorb pollution, and that wouldn't require the farmer's help. The members decided to carefully dismantle the walls so that most of the materials could be repurposed for other projects. Lazarus had offered to try to use his demolition axe, but Tangier remarked that clearing the tree of sharp slate debris wouldn't be any easier than dismantling it carefully, even if the process was more fun initially. The project turned out to have at least one additional benefit. With all of the Adlets working on their own trades and specialized projects, rarely were they all together at the same time, except when fighting for their lives at the Western Gate. Dave shared stories about his brief life as a mercenary while the others listened on in amusement. What interested the squires was how there were so many other communities they had never known about. Their coastal home was very isolated on an island, and they had almost no contact with anyone else except for the occasional shipwrecked refugee. Hearing about the other enclaves of surviving communities was fascinating. Megoof said to leave the farm plots alone for now. He wanted to observe the difference that removing the walls and roof would make first. Judea peered over Megoof's shoulder to see him sketching what seemed to be an improved desk, able to accommodate flasks, scrolls, beakers, and other literature. He explained the difficulty he was facing trying to juggle so many texts in a limited workspace, and she said she was happy to help. Megoof showed Lazarus schematics for some components he would need for Tangier's gift. The new tools that had been built for Lazarus's workshop allowed him to craft a much wider variety of equipment, besides just arms and armor. He said it would be no problem at all. It was now time to return to studying the tree to see whether or not the removal of the farm walls made an impact. Sapo realized the current stockpiles of fungus were far more likely to rot rather than the Adlets running out of food. Megahoof had mentioned that the new crops would keep far better in the winter. Sapo decided to try to make the mushrooms into nicer meals than the soups he had been brewing, because even if some of the mushrooms went to waste making the nicer meals, they wouldn't be missed anyway. Tangier went into labor. Lazarus and Sapo immediately dropped what they were doing and readied themselves for a long night ahead. Megahoof returned to the keep, unsure whether or not their rescue plan had actually helped the tree. The only way the Adlets could prevent their keep from becoming overrun by pollution was to care for the trees, and Megahoof felt the weight of that responsibility bearing down upon him. He roughly plotted the area around the tree to track the reduction of pollution and hoped he'd have more answers by tomorrow. Madzi continued to stack salvaged slate bricks from the old tree farm as Arauco cut more stone for building. Twilight hours in the Bison Glade were normally peaceful, but tonight others were stirring for the delivery of Tangier and Lazarus's child. Aurelka could hear a collective sigh of relief from the delivery room, even over the loud chiseling of his stonework. The newest member of the Glade was a healthy baby boy named Shellbell. He congratulated Lazarus as the armor-clad squire stumbled around rushing to manage both his fiancée and baby, who both needed tending to. Today marks the final day of spring. The Adlets were jubilant with the good news of a happy and healthy baby. Megoof wanted to be seen present in the keep for the good news, even though he had responsibilities pulling him elsewhere. Madzi wanted to rearrange the school blackboards and desk. She claimed it was to move further from the smelter and furnace's noxious aura, but in reality she just wanted an unobstructed view of the workshop. Megahoof headed out to continue studying the tree while the new parents slept in from the ordeal. With most of the current projects completed, Judea decided it was the right time to break ground on her idea to keep the Adlets safer from raids. She wanted to build a wall around the perimeter of the keep, which would allow the Adlets to better defend themselves against barbaric raids from visitors. She had discussed the plans with Tangier and Dave to ensure that they had a united idea of the best way to build. Once the plans were drafted up, she inquired with everyone else if they minded the extra stone-cutting duties, and nobody seemed to dissent. With everything in place, the time was now to start construction on the curtain wall with added merlons. The 11 Adlet kingdoms were almost always at peace with one another, and the last period of infighting was hundreds of years prior to the invasion. Most of the castles and keeps that the Catraro kingdom had built did not include curtain walls or merlons for this reason, but instead most castles utilized towers to survey the lands for fires and floods and other natural disasters. Some of the oldest stonework the Adlets had built did incorporate defensive features, but Judea had only seen diagrams of them from history books that were salvaged from the visitor incursion, so she didn't know the best way to design their defenses. She, Tangier, and Dave had built small-scale models using rocks and twigs, and imagined stage raids as a mental way to test their plans. She knew there'd be many iterations as they had to relearn the methods that had been lost to eons of peace. Megahoof sighed when he saw the ambrosia sprout out around the tree. The ambrosia probably had some adaptation to test the quality of the soil, and countless bushes were likely lying dormant under all the pollution. Unfortunately for these bushes, the soil would soon turn to blighted rot, and he thought it was such a waste that they could not manage to relocate the delicate plants. Sappho and Lazarus had attempted to dig up the bushes before, but as soon as they did, it would wither and die. The monsters' war banners could be seen on the horizon to the northwest. Visitors returned to the glade once more. The squire shouted for everyone to flee into the keep. Sappho ditched his farming axe for a bow. Lazarus got to work trying to craft another bow. And Megahoof told Tangier to stay behind for this and headed north. On multiple occasions, the squires would see the monsters brawling one another. The raiders never used words or hand gestures. The only thing the Adlets ever heard were grunts and battle roars. It was very strange that a seemingly sophisticated war party never communicated with one another, besides the occasional infighting. The war party seemed so consumed with bloodlust from their own infighting that they barely noticed the Adlets' volley of arrows. Finally, they broke from their brawl and faced the Adlets to pursue them, so the Adlets fled back towards their keep to hide behind their strong walls. Dave encouraged the archers to re-engage, as he wagered they had landed enough arrows that the raiders would be wounded and unable to pursue at full speed. It was well known that visitors could easily outrun athlets, even in full armor, but they trusted their ex-mercenary and returned to the marsh. The archers could clearly hear the low roar of war cries become louder and louder still, and decided to flee behind the granite walls. The archers decided to close the reinforced stone door behind them, as the raiding party lacked the weapons to attack through arrow loops. They asked Lazarus to make sure the door held shut and readied their arrows for the next volley. The angered raiders attempted to set fire to the keep before fleeing back into the marshes. Their plan had worked, and Lazarus reopened the slab door to put out the small fire. Judea said that she would be happy to take care of the one survivor. The marsh would be filled once again. The stonework keep was unpleasantly hot. With all of the combat and commotion, the plan to build swamp coolers had been overlooked, but Megahoof acted swiftly to address the balmy temperatures. Despite another day passing where Megahoof had missed the occurrence of the tree absorbing pollution, he had tracked the quantity of bags of polluted topsoil and the total area of pollution around the tree, and calculated that the northern tree wasn't irreparably damaged. A weight lifted off his shoulders. He did worry, however, that the curtain wall would hinder the tree's ability to cleanse the soil, but at least now he knew that if that was to happen, they could come together to relocate the wall, and no permanent harm would be done to the tree. The night was quiet and the keep was cooling. The swamp coolers worked exactly as designed, and the ambient temperature of the air in the keep dropped significantly. The stone and timber floor still radiated heat from the midday sun, and there was a significant amount of dust in the air from all the stone cutting for the defensive walls. The bison grunted and bellowed, and those bellows often echoed throughout the keep. Lazarus finished crafting extra bows while Tangier and Arelco chiseled blocks and stacked them outside. While building the Eastern Gate Merlins, Judea realized their offering pile to the wild creatures would need to be relocated. Megahoof returned to the tree once more, hoping it would give up its closely guarded secrets. He had come to find peace in quiet contemplation, and enjoyed the small patch of purified soil. He envisioned a day where the secrets of the smog, visitors, and trees would be unlocked, and the entire glade cleansed of poison. Originally, these squires were sent inland to assess whether or not it could support the burgeoning population of the coastal village, and their mission would only be a success if they could utilize the trees to clean huge swaths of land. This vision both seemed possible and also impossibly out of reach. Every small step towards progress that he and the others had made was swiftly met with abrupt violence. He feared for his friends and family, but knew only through bravery and ingenuity they could endure. Tangier was asked if it would be possible for her to mine out some additional mountain space. Megouv worried that if his math was correct, that the next smog would heavily repollute the keep. Megahoof decided to wrap up his study of the tree, at least for now, and asked the others if they could flatten the tilled soil. He was fairly sure tilling the soil didn't negatively affect the tree, but it wasn't a gamble worth taking if he was wrong given how easy it would be to rake out the garden rows. Most of the curtain wall took shape, and the Adlets were proud of their progress. The teeny Bison Glade community were building grand structures, raising children, caring for infants, and unlocking long-forgotten technologies, all the while defending against near-weekly raids of well-armed and armored monsters. All of Dave's stories of other communities recounted enclaves in hiding, much like how the coastal village nested itself deep in the cliffs of an isolated island. As far as anyone knew, no community existed in bold defiance of the monsters. Whether that was a beacon of hope or a stark reminder of the fragility of life was still up for debate. The bison's sleeping spots were rearranged outdoors, both to accommodate the growing herd and to prevent the bison from overheating in the intense summer sun. Megahoof had uncovered the designs and technology to construct mine shafts. Adlets were famously horde miners, but in order to fuel the grand Adlet kingdoms, the need for coal and metals greatly outpaced the yield from surface mines. Megahoof had many ancestors who had worked in mines, and Tangier's mining pick was even an heirloom that had been passed down. Megahoof's next ambitious project would be to construct a mineshaft inside the keep walls to allow Tangier to excavate useful ores and coal from the comfort of home and well within the protection of its walls. He knew that much of the keep had been built into the foothills of a slate mountain, so the structural integrity of the keep wouldn't be compromised if the mineshaft was constructed deep enough not to destabilize the surface. To complete this project, he would need enough wood to build sturdy mine props to keep the shafts of the mine from collapsing. He knew he'd need to help Tangier learn about safe usage and construction of mine props. He wagered that Tangier's aversion to being away from home and the safety of the walls meant that she'd be passionate about learning how to safely work as a shaft miner. Between becoming a mother and having the entire community devise a way for her to work more safely and comfortably, Tangier was overwhelmed with love for her community. She and Lazarus decided to celebrate with a modest wedding. The Adlets waited patiently as Tangier was pulled away to tend to Shellbell. The ceremony was brief on account of Shellbell and Bash's whimpering cries heard echoing throughout the stone keep. Tangier mimicked the way Judea treated Megahoof's mask at their wedding and lifted Lazarus's helmet visor, and the Adlets erupted in laughter. Lazarus played into the joke and fluttered his eyes and pretended to twirl imaginary long locks of flowing hair. Lazarus apologized that the hops hadn't finished growing, but they'd share a celebratory drink after the next hop harvest. Madsy had collected some ripthorn leaves and spread the petals around the central keep pillar. The sun dipped below the mountains, and after a long day of revelry, most of the Adlets retired to their snug linen beds. Dave had been practicing his masonry with both Tangier and Judea. He had learned a lot in just the last few weeks and managed to lay stonework adequately. He worked until late at night, surrounded by scurrying waste rats, as he whistled old tunes and hummed to himself quietly. Sappho and Lazarus had harvested the first crop of pumpkins. Megahoof had directed them about how to care for the plants, but never actually divulged what they were for. Due to a slight miscommunication, they were accidentally left out, and as soon as Sappho realized this mistake, he asked Megahoof if the orange plants were edible. To his delight, Megahoof confirmed they were indeed food. Megahoof shared a recipe with Sappho, but unfortunately it called for the harvest of wheat as well, so Sappho would experiment how to cook the new unusually large orange bulbs for himself. Just as Lazarus promised, the hops were ready to harvest, just not in time for his nuptials. He couldn't wait for the new batch of ale and beer, and told Sappho he'd be happy to take more of the farming responsibilities if it meant he'd get to work brewing. Lazarus spotted a war party lurking to the south and rushed into the keep to warn the others. Perhaps the previous group were just scouts, or maybe they were rivaling visitor factions? Why two smaller raids would attempt to breach the walls separately rather than banding together signaled a lack of coherence among the visitors, a weakness the Atlas could exploit. Arelco offered to keep watch so that people could sleep. This war party was staging, and they wouldn't strike until likely sometime in the morn. Waiting to be attacked didn't sit well with Megahoof. He joined Arelco on the night's watch. Megahoof helped Madzi haul the hops to the kitchen and checked on the progress of the ancient seeds in the farm. He did not enjoy the calm before the storm. He preferred to strike first, but knew under the cloak of darkness the visitors clearly had the advantage. The call went out, and everybody got ready. The raid was incoming. The visitors flooded into the main gate, bloodthirsty and growling, spoiling for a fight. They clearly lacked gear and weapons, unlike many of the previous attacks. Lazarus easily deflected their feeble strikes. The Adlets were happy about their victory, but confused why this group posed so much less of a threat than raids in the past. These visitors were more scrawny and wore tattered clothing and not armor. Megahoof wanted to interrogate them, but knew that with infants and children in the keep, it was a terrible idea. Judea offered to finish off the survivors and asked for help to haul them to the bank of the marsh. The Adlets worked swiftly to haul the dead away from the keep. The summer heat would accelerate the corpses to rot. Judea pondered whether she should construct a crematorium to help deal with the piles of bodies, not to respect the dead monsters, but to make sure nobody would succumb to the corpse blight. The raid posed more questions for Megahoof's already encumbered mind. Why did the visitors fight one another? Why were they using Adlet-made arms and armor? Why did they attack in small raid parties? Why were they attacking at all? The pollution-absorbing trees remained very much a riddle for Megahoof, and now so too were the visitors. Thank you for watching Episode 10 of Hedge Knights, Curtain Wall. If you would like to support me as a content creator, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this content with your friends. If you would like to become one of my Patreon patrons, a link to Patreon can be found in the description of this video. Thank you so very much for watching, and a special thank you to my Patreon patrons, Twitch subscribers, and viewers like you that support the channel and made it all the way to the credits. Thank you so very much. I hope to catch you in next episode. Farewell, my fellow Adlets.